Good afternoon to everyone. Manipal Global Academy of Data Science extends a very warm welcome to all to today's webinar session on Instinct for Insights, Sports Analytics in India. The Academy routinely invites industry leaders to speak on very relevant and contemporary topics in the data science and analytics space. And towards that endeavor, we have organized this session on a very interesting and riveting topic, which is sports analytics. Now, with the IPL that's recently concluded and the buzz around it, we're sure all of you will find this session very engaging. The speaker for today's session is Mr. Gaurav. He works as a senior stats analyst with ESPN, and he's been in the sports analytics domain for close to 6 years. He's worked with the Indian cricket team and with IPL franchisees. Also has presented a paper at MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference at Boston and is a visiting faculty at Symbiosis Institute of Management Studies. So I now hand over to Mr. Gaurav to take over the session.
Hello everybody, hope you can hear me. So good evening, hope all of you have keenly followed the Indian Premier League and all set for the next big tournament in the Champions Trophy. So before we just get into the presentation, I would just like to maybe give you a small introduction about myself. So I've been working in this field for about 4 to 5 years. I've been in the sports analytics field. I'm a big follower of the game of various sports, and I got into this industry as a it was a more of a I was pretty lucky to get into this field. It was all by a coincidence, but I'm very happy today that I've taken the plunge into sports analytics, which is very, very niche in India. So one thing I would like to share straight away is the industry is very niche and it's just starting to grow. So it is maybe where analytics was maybe 5-6 years ago. Today analytics is a big data is a very it's a big buzzword now. It was like how IT was in early 90s, but analytics has been applied very well in pharma, manufacturing, banking sectors, etc., where I'm sure a lot of you must be working, even especially in IT. But how is it used in sports? So that is what I'm planning to cover today. So let me just start off with a brief introduction. Basically, sports analytics is something which all of us can relate to. And today, like I'd mentioned earlier, most of the data which we analyze is from finance sector, manufacturing sector, where we are not actually very strong in our domain. Whereas sports is something which all of us have been watching, following for the ages now, and where we will be able to add a lot of value when it comes to analytics. So you don't need to be only strong in numbers to actually get into analytics. You need to know the domain. So pick a sport which you're very strong in and maybe then look to apply data. Whereas in all the other sectors, we are looking to apply the numbers, the knowledge which data provides onto the industry. Here it will be the other way around, which is something which I've learned. So today's webinar is just going to be very short and cover some basics of what sports analytics is, what is the data management lifecycle, what are the various types of analytics, how can we actually apply analytics in sports. That is something which which I hope will be an eye opener to a lot of you, and a sample case studies which I've come across, which I've used in the industry, and what skills are required to actually to shine in this field. So, like Divya had mentioned earlier, I started working initially for the Indian cricket team, helping them to make some decisions, crunching numbers, and also a lot of video in data. And now I do the same type of work, but my audience is different. I don't do it for teams anymore. I do it for fans, so people who come and read stuff at ESPN Cricinfo. So let's just give you a brief introduction about what is analytics and what is that we are doing. So obviously there's a lot of data. All of you must have heard of big data, and we've been kind of dealing with a lot of data across all verticals in the last 17 to 20 years. So for the start, like you can see, data gets created in various ways. So if you take an example of a cricket match, or just a simple cricket match, in one over or even in one ball, there's close to 50 to 60 data points that can actually be captured. So just for one ball, I'm able to get 60 to 70 data points. So by data points, what I mean is something like who's the bowler, who's the batsman, where is the ball pitch, where's the run scored, how many runs are scored, which ground are we playing in, which pitch are we playing in, who's the umpire. There's a lot of data points that are created based on just one single ball. So like similar to other industries where you have different KPIs to actually measure the various parameters. Similarly, in sports as well, a lot of amount of data is created. So I'm sure all of you must have heard of the IBM Slam Tracker. So IBM is a corporate which entered into analytics way before most of the other companies did. So the Slam Tracker is nothing but engine which IBM has created, an engine which IBM has created to actually run a lot of trends and patterns for fans. So that is like the most advanced technology in terms of tennis analytics you can actually see, which is just open to fans and not, I mean, the players and all don't use it much, but at least it's open to fans. So they have more than 40 million data points, as you can see, which they collect, and they analyze players' performance, their strength and weaknesses. So analytics is something which is growing, and one thing which I would like to share with all of you is that in India, analytics is still way behind. We are a one-sport nation as of now, which is only cricket. After this, we have football, and we have hockey, we have kabaddi, we have various leagues coming up. So that's good for the industry as such. But overall, if you see, it's a one-sport industry, and cricket gives you a decent amount of scope, but not the kind of scope that the Western sports actually give you. So if you take American sports, the big four: basketball, baseball, ice hockey, and American football, they are the leaders in sports analytics today. The amount of data points, the amount of companies which are actually helping them today is huge. So the analytics usage and application of analytics is very big in the American sports, and it is yet to reach that kind of level in India. But all I can tell you that anything which actually starts there ultimately trickles down to India. So I'm very confident that in the next 3-4 years, it will be a very common practice to have data-driven decisions made in sports, similar to the Western sports. So we are in good space, and it's a good time to enter this field, considering the amount of sporting competitions that are taking place. So like I mentioned earlier, in 60 seconds you have different kinds of data points which actually are being generated today from your various social media websites, and as the slide shows, it can come from anywhere. So what are we doing with so much data? So so let me give you an understanding of the birth of sports analytics. I'm sure those who are familiar with the movie Moneyball would actually already be knowing this. So how did sports analytics actually originate? So it started off with the Oakland A's way back about 15, 16 years ago, when one Mr. Billy Bean was hired to actually help Oakland A's do well. So his basic agenda was to help the team do well. So, and in especially in baseball, there's a completely different methodology in which you pick players, unlike you have in the IPL, where everybody has a fixed cap. Every team, the richer teams can get the better players, and the poorer teams may not get the better players. So that's how it is in baseball. So as you can see, the payroll rank for the Yankees was way higher, which is obviously the which means they have more money compared to what the Oakland A's have, which is a huge advantage because you get to buy the bigger players. So how did Billy Bean actually tackle this? He used some sophisticated models. He used a lot of data. He identified players for specific roles. Who's the best pitcher? Who's best at first base? Who runs fast? So there might be guys. There might be names who are not really famous, but people were picked for their skills. And he did this by analyzing a lot of numbers. He identified players who have specific skill sets, and they have numbers which can back those skill sets. So this is how sports analytics actually originated. And Michael Lewis had written this book about Moneyball, which actually kind of propagated it, and the movie came out. So a lot of people started understanding what analytics is. So the Oakland A's succeeded. They managed to make the playoffs, which is something which was a great achievement at that point in time, considering the amount of money they actually spent, and they had a very good record in the league stage. So sports in the western part is slightly different. Like I told you, the leagues run throughout the year, and there's no concept of country. Here in India, it's the complete opposite, with leagues running just for 2 months a year in the IPL and 10 months of the year with the national team. So you have just 8 or 9 very strong teams in cricket to actually apply analytics. So the application is far lesser in the Indian sports than the American sports, but I'm sure we will get there. The other most important thing which I would like to share is one huge difference between cricket and maybe the other sports is that the manager or the coach is the boss in the Western sports, whereas in cricket it's the captain who's the boss and not the coaches. Coaches only facilitate decision making, but the captain is the one who takes all the decisions. So right now, these data analytics decisions have to be the whole concept has to be bought in by the captain more than the coaches. So which is why it is slightly harder to actually go up and tell a particular captain that just take your decision based on numbers and not based on your gut feel. So that is something which I have actually learned over the last few years, that it's important that the captain actually buys into your theories rather than the coach. So moving forward, I will give you more examples on that. So let's look at some sample questions where analytics can actually play a big role. So what should be my playing 11, for example, in a particular match? Or which player should I pick in an auction? Or what should be my game plan to win? Or what would be the optimal schedule for the tournament? Here, this has nothing to do with team performance, but this has more to do with whether a particular team, whether it's actually equal for all teams. If you take the example of the IPL, you see certain teams finishing 10 or 12 games way before the other team. So, and there's some teams which play 4 games at a stretch in the last week. It actually happened even this year, where Delhi played a lot in the last week, and Bangalore had actually completed their games almost 1 week in advance. So, to be fair, that's not the right way to do it, and we can actually even cut costs by using analytics to actually find the optimal schedule. We can, since we know where each team is going to play, the schedule can be, the data can be analyzed, and a proper schedule can also be put. So these are all small opportunities. How do I manage workload for players, or which venue should I play to get maximum revenue? So that is a application of analytics in the fan side. So as a businessman, as a franchise owner, if I have to say, if you go to Mumbai, you have 3 stadiums. You have a stadium outside of Bombay, Navi Mumbai. You have the Wankhede Stadium. You have the CCI Stadium. So at which venue do I actually play my games to get the maximum revenues, which is accessible to the city, where are the cricket following population? So these are answers for which today it is not being done. So that's the opportunity we have in sports, where all these questions can be answered to just pure numbers. And again, through my experience, it's not just numbers which will get you the right result. It should be a combination of instincts and insight. So that's where an instinct with a lot of number-driven analysis, where the stakeholder actually buys into the system to gain an advantage. So I'll come back to more examples moving forward. So let me just cover the basics of data management before we go into more use cases. So a typical data science process, just like any other industry, is that data is collected, data is processed, quality of data is checked, you run some kind of analysis, you build models, then you visualize the whole thing, and you make decisions. So this is how a typical data management process is done today across all domains. So let's apply the same thing to sports and see whether at what phase do we have opportunities, and what actually makes sense, and where is India today in terms of usage of analytics. So data collection. So let us look at data collection. So before we even go to data collection, there are two kinds of data types which today we can collect. One is structured data and one is unstructured data. So if we look at structured data, basically we just look at a match. We can easily collect a lot of data points, like I told you, runs, balls, who's the bowler, who's the umpire. Similarly, in tennis, you can figure out how many forehands, how many backhands, how many points were won in the net, how many aces. So just watching and analyzing this, entering this data point using a software and creating a sample set is one way of analyzing data. So this is basically your structured data set. So example is, as you can see, is the first serve percentage, second serve points, one average, double fault. These are all basic data points which have been analyzed, and we come up with some value. So this is structured data, and this is what is used very traditionally across all sports in India today. We capture the data using video, and then we have guys to actually tag the data, and then we have guys to interpret the data. So this is an opportunity for young guys to take up this, where they can take up, all you need is a camera and a mobile app to capture a large amount of data. And you have the other challenging data set, which is the unstructured data set. So if you look at this particular commentary, which is basically from the World Cup final, there's so many data points that are actually there in one line of commentary. If you look at, say, 47.4, you have the bowler name, you have the batsman name, you have how many runs he scored, what ball was bowled, it's Yorker, what length was bowled, the slower one, and where does the ball actually go, and who's the fielder. It says Sangha dives to his left, so we know that it's the wicket keeper. But the only thing is, you're not visually seeing it. But you have so many small startups which are doing text analytics, which can actually get this kind of data from unstructured sources. So another opportunity, if you guys are very interested in coding and you guys can actually code and pull out unstructured data, nothing like it. So you can look at text or images and try to pull out the relevant data for a particular ball, and then do your analysis on. Although, to be fair, this is just picking up, and I know just a couple of startups who have started doing this. At the end of the day, if you can get the data in any form, at the end, the analysis is more important. But obviously, without data, you can't. So if you feel today that there is no data available in the public domain for, say, if I want kabaddi, or if I'm looking at tennis or football, you're not sure how to go about data collection, this is one way which you can actually do if you're strong in coding. So coming back to data collection, today it's done manually most of the time, whereas in the West it is done there are a lot of softwares which do it in an automated way, and you have cameras and sensors which are actually placed in the ground. If a typical English Premier League match has close to 17 to 20 cameras set in the ground to collect information from various angles, and you have sensors located as well, which automatically collects information. Cricket, unfortunately, does not allow this by law, but I'm expecting those to change very soon, because the kind of data like heartbeat, running speed, those things are not yet collected in cricket. Very few companies, very few actually team associations do it. One company which is venturing big time into India is Catapult Technologies, which are building sensors, and they are associating themselves with cricket boards to actually collect information of bowlers. batsmen, their height, length of their arm when they bowl, and what is the optimum heart rate they have during a course of a T20 match, how do they bowl under pressure. There's so much data which you can actually collect. So these are some of the companies I've just mentioned which actually help you in data collection. And Hawkeye, obviously all of you are aware. So if you want a career in data collection, I'll tell you the nature of work, which is basically you need to be very strong in identifying what data is right and what data is wrong. So data quality, data cleansing is something which you need to do. It will also help you identify a role in product management in one of these companies. Why do I say product management is because you need to understand the sport. Once you understand the sport, you need to figure out what data points to be collected. If you don't know what data points to be collected, you can't even do the analysis. So for that, you need to know the sport and your product. So you're building a mobile app, say, to collect Kabaddi data. You need to know Kabaddi very well, and you need to know what are the potential data points that could arise. Or if I'm looking at cricket, like for example, free hits. It was not even a law way before the T20 era started. And once we had T20 starting, we figured out that there's something called free hit. So somebody has to start collecting free hits. Otherwise, today, 10 years down the line, if I want to know who is the best bowler who bowls whenever there's a free hit, who has considered least number of runs, I won't be able to do it. So that is something where data points will keep evolving. So if you're building a product, you have to make sure that you build a product that can cater to futuristic data points as well, which is why that whole product management and development comes. And obviously, you need to know the domain, and one big skill, very honestly, is patience. Why I'm saying patience is to collect, say, a test match. It's basically 90 overs a day, and it's a lot of data points to collect in a particular day. So you need to spend a lot of time to ensure that the quality of data is very high. So that's why I said you need a lot of patience. Moving on to the next set of in the data management lifecycle is data analysis and reporting. So some proprietary softwares, obviously, which all of you know, I'm sure are aware, is SPSS, R, SAS, MS Excel, and SQL Server. So this is what is being used in all the analytics companies today. What they do basically is, say you're working in the healthcare, or say you're working in a hotel industry, or you want to understand your audience. All you do is you get the large amount of data set, do some models in R or SPSS or whatever software you use, and then try to come out with the top 10%, the top 5% of people you want to target. So today, again, like I mentioned earlier, sports is not yet there. Sports is still evolving, where the focus is more on mapping domain with numbers and converting that into useful insights and transferring to the captain. So ultimately, the sports, what do you call the sports sector today, the stakeholders in the sports do not understand too much of numbers. They do not understand what, say, regression is, or what if you're doing some kind of probability. They don't understand these things. So again, because the kind of people running sports in India and the kind of people who are coaching and in the management, apart from the IPL, is pretty low on knowledge on these things. So it's going to be hard to actually convince them to do analytics yet. But I'm very confident that in 3-4 years, the kind of people running the sport will also change, and more leagues will come up, and there will be a target segment to actually run algorithms. But having said that, sports analytics is not just only catering to teams or only catering to players. There's another completely a huge untapped segment in terms of the fans, which I will come into in the later half of the presentation. But that's where you actually apply your knowledge of SPSS, R, and SQL, etc. So what kind of work would you be doing here? This is for the so-called geeks who are into data modeling, analysis, who know how all these statistical tools by the back of their hand, and what kind of skills you require. Domain knowledge, obviously. Without knowing the domain, you can't run. But I would say it's 60% maths and analytical skills and strong in statistical concepts, and 40% domain knowledge. This is something which might open up to 3 years down the line, where you start using predictive modeling to predict certain things, predict the outcome in an innings, or you predict the score, what is ideal in a particular venue. This is today done for fans to broadcast, but if you actually want to make it work in a match, I think we are still behind in that aspect. Next is data visualization. So obviously, once you analyze the data, at some point you will have to showcase that in a nice way. Again, we are way behind in this with respect to players and coaches. They really don't care how you get the data, as long as they get the data. Whereas if you look at fans, you look at corporates, you look at broadcasters, you need to show the data in a very, very simple way, and so that people understand. So some obviously the most common visualization softwares I've listed: Tableau, Orange, HighCharts, but how are we going to actually represent the data? That depends totally on the stakeholders you're dealing with. If you're dealing with a corporate or you're dealing with a franchise owner, you show him in a particular way. If you're dealing with a player or a coach, you completely show it in the most simplest form possible. If you're dealing with fans, you have to do some innovative dashboards. And if you've looked at all these Premier League sites, or you look at any of the fan-facing sites, you will find that they try to show graphs, they try to show some kind of fancy pie charts or the spider graphs or whatever. So those are just different ways of showing data. Ultimately, what matters is what insights come out of this data, especially in sports. So what skills do you again require? You require domain knowledge and you require creativity. Why do I say creativity? Is because you need to show these numbers in a form by which any a third person can understand easily. Even if you have no knowledge of sports, you should be able to clearly understand what the data conveys. So people who have data scientist aspirations, those guys can look to apply to particular jobs in data visualization. Moving forward, I'm sure all those who are in the analytics domain know what the various types of analytics are. But what I wanted to maybe explain to you guys is what is an example of these kind of analytics in sports, and so that you kind of know where sports is today. So the first and the basic kind of analytics is descriptive analytics, which is basically a preliminary stage of data processing that creates a summary of historical data, and it prepares the data for further analysis. So this is what you get today from your tools like Google Analytics, your Cricinfo Stats Guru, where you can just understand based on what's happened. So assume that. So I've given you two examples. I know for a fact that, say, Buffon dives only to the left always during a penalty. I've taken 50 penalties, 45 times he's dived to the left. So this is a very basic example of descriptive analytics, where I tell the player that, look, 47 times a goalkeeper dives to the left, so the chances of him diving to the right are so less. You go and try to score in the left. Whether he scores in the left or right, and that you leave to execution. But all analytics can say is this is what the numbers say. But you feel today, if you are part of the remaining 3% where he's going to dive to the right, that's your choice. But what analytics can help you is at least arrive at something. All these days, penalty takers just went by gut feel, but today you can do that. Similarly, Virat Kohli scoring a century against Australia. We know he scored, his favorite team is Australia. He scored 9 to 10 centuries against them across formats. All we can tell Australia is, look, he scored a lot of centuries against you, so be careful. But I can't tell more than that. Whether you have plans that you need to dig deeper, but so this is just examples of descriptive analytics, and it's more what's happened. The next kind of analytics is diagnostic analytics, which gives you insight. Why did something happen? So this is where today's sports is, and this is where your primary job would be. This is where I have worked most of my life in the last 3 or 4 years, is basically why something happened. So you don't run models here, but you dive deep into data. You have a lot of data. You try to identify patterns. You use your domain knowledge. So let me straight away go to the example. So why does a wicket fall? Why does a particular player actually lose his wicket in a particular way? So that is something numbers can tell you. For example, let's look at, say, maybe if I give an example in the IPL, recent IPL. If you find so one person who's they try to look at battles. So one example where analytics was actually used was with MS Dhoni. So Dhoni has actually struggled with Jasprit Bumrah, and he usually finds it difficult to hit him. So one example of analytics is, so how to get Dhoni out. That would be one of a sample question or one objective which the team would actually use it in their planning. So they will go and look at all the balls Dhoni has faced of Jasprit Bumrah and try to see if there's any pattern. So they obviously found out that there's something which Dhoni finds difficult to hit Bumrah. Maybe his balls are bowled at a particular line and length, which is very hard for Dhoni to hit, because normally he's very good at hitting Yorkers. So how do you find out? Maybe the Yorker, if it's on the stumps, Dhoni hits it for the 6. If it's slightly outside of stump, he hits it for the 4, and maybe more wide outside of stump, he doesn't hit. So that is something which maybe data says. And that was the plan which actually worked quite well for Mumbai this year. I think 2 times out of 3 instances, Bumrah was brought in as soon as Dhoni came in, and Bumrah got his wicket. And the other instance actually didn't work. Dhoni hit Bumrah for a couple of sixes in the playoffs. So that can maybe come down to pressure or handling execution. But one thing you saw common was Bumrah getting the ball as soon as Dhoni coming into bat. So this is something which a fan may not just realize by watching the game, but that's where it depends on how much a team actually thinks that analytics can help you. So the odds are higher. Whether it works or not is beyond your control, but all you could do is give that information and make the captain make a decision. Similarly, reason for conceding a goal on a counter attack. If you see the England football team, they have a history of conceding a lot of goals on counter attack. The moment they are 1-0 up, they go into the defensive and they are happy scoring 1 goal, and they end up losing the match quite a lot of time. So why does a goal happen during a counter attack? What is that? Do players get very complacent, or are people still celebrating from the previous goal, or is the defense slightly less under pressure? These are things by which you can actually analyze and make a decision. So that is what is diagnostic analytics. Similarly, predictive, this is very common in all other sectors except sports, where this has just started emerging over the last 2 years. So if a simple example would be score predictor. Today, every single broadcaster, even in the IPL, just project the runs based on the run rate. If I'm scoring at 6, I score so much. If I score at 8, I score so much. But that is rarely the case. That never happens. People have not evolved yet, because everybody knows it depends on the batsman who's coming into bat, depends on the bowlers who are yet to bowl. If I have a slightly a weak bowler bowling the 19th or 20th over, I can even score like 20-25 runs in the 1 over. So things change dramatically. So this is where a few companies which I've been part of, as well as broadcasters, are slowly tapping into these companies to find out the ideal model to actually work to predict some scores. We have actually come up with in one of my experiences, come up with a very, very good model which predicts the score based on batsman batting, based on bowler available, based on the wicket conditions. If you look at the old, or if you look at the Wankhede wicket, the last 5 overs you can score close to more than 60-70 runs. Whereas if you had played with the Chinnaswamy this year, there's no way you're able to score more than 40 runs in the last 5 overs. So models need to take this into account if you want to build a strong model, and that can be an application which can be used by the broadcasters. So similarly in tennis, I think one thing which all of you might have to go back and see is the IBM Slam Tracker. They already have a predictive engine in their product, where whenever you see a Nadal or a Djokovic actually playing, you will find out based on past data where they're likely to hit the ball, or what's the probability that they're actually going to win the point, and who has the momentum, etc. Everything is there in a live IBM Slam Tracker game. You should watch that during one of the Grand Slams. You will get a fair idea. So some techniques used are logistic regression, or I think today that's what is being used most of the time for predicting. But I'm sure more and more guys would come up with new models. Right now, I'm pretty sure all of you are not aware of how to actually start doing this, or how to go into such domain. So in India, there are just about 3-4 companies which do this. So it's important you guys identify these companies and have a very strong analytics skill set. So one way of doing this is working in the analytics domain for some other sector, learning these skill sets, and then applying that knowledge onto the domain. Because you need to be strong in a domain to actually make the model work very efficiently. So I would maybe advise most of you to actually look at applying, understanding the concepts of analytics, understanding how regression is done, how your models can be built, how can we have a robust model, and then try to use your cricketing or sports knowledge on that. Finally, we have the prescriptive analytics. Basically, this is a type of analytics which hardly has been explored in India, and it will take a lot of time for this to actually come to light due to a lot of maybe legal issues. At the same time, not many are aware, and cricket is not a very maybe, for example, if I take fantasy cricket, it's not a good sport to play fantasy cricket because it happens, tests and bilateral series happens just for like 15 days or 20 days, and it's not much fun. It doesn't test your skills actually. Maybe the IPL or the World Cups are good tournaments to play, but otherwise you don't see fantasy cricket actually moving ahead. So I think we need to wait for 2-3 years before prescriptive analytics actually becomes a reality in sports. So like I told you, these are the various types of analytics today, and the sports industry currently is in what's happened. This is where people are, and at least in India. Whereas if I look at the Western sports, or even if I look at football, for that matter, it's reached the stage of predictive analytics for fans, and more into detailed analysis for players and teams. Whereas today, the captain, today, for example, why I say it's just in what's happened is a captain might even remember that if you take a small tournament like IPL, you don't need analytics to say that Watson gets out LBW often, for example. By just purely watching and reading stuff, you know that he's a LBW candidate. Or especially if you look at cricket, you have techniques. Where it's very hugely dependent on each batsman's technique. So if you go and tell a batsman that, look, your technique is LBW prone, that is something you can't do based on analytics. You need numbers to prove that. Whereas a coach can actually go and say that if the technique is wrong. So today, cricketers are still open to hearing more about their technique and from coaches rather than telling them that you're out 5 times LBW and that's what the numbers say. Whereas the opportunity lies clearly in the predictive analytics space, according to me. Small opportunities in different sports. If we can predict that this is what this bowler is going to bowl this ball to this batsman, it's phenomenal. Imagine that information if a batsman has. If Dhoni knows that Bumrah is going to bowl a wide outside of some Yorker and he does not play the switch hit or reverse scoop, he has to develop that shot. He has to start playing that to avoid that so that the bowler comes up with another plan. So that's how it is today in the field of cricket. So let me take you through the various application of analytics and what kind of, so where are the different phases where you can actually get a job. So one is the most important and in sector is the performance analytics space. That's where I have been around for so many years. You can help teams, you can help players, you can help umpires for that matter. There's so many bad decisions which happen in the IPL this season. I'm sure there's an opportunity there. Not many people are actually doing analytics with respect to umpiring decisions. So imagine somebody collecting all the information of a particular umpire throughout the course of an IPL, and then you kind of figure out that he has made most of his decisions wrong against a particular team or against a particular type of bowler, or maybe even after the strategic timeout or after the break. So you know where his concentration is. So these are small applications which today nobody is doing, but that's where the analytics can play a big role. Real-time analytics is something which I told you before, used in broadcasting, where you can predict win-loss situations, live match competitive intelligence, and what ideally what score should I score, or based on real-time data. If you're looking at football, when do I substitute a particular player? That can be shown on TV today. No, I don't think they show that a particular coach's strategy of when he's likely to substitute a particular player. How many minutes can he actually play? That is something which can be explored. Another big area which is to be tapped is fan analytics. Today, nobody knows what. So obviously Facebook, Google, these guys kind of throw ads based on analytics to you, kind of throw what your favorite movie is, and maybe that comes up as an ad, or who's your favorite actor. But imagine this being applied in sports. People are trying this, but it's still a big opportunity in India. We don't see the big analytics firm getting into this space. You don't need to be a sports expert to actually do this, but you need to kind of understand the sport in terms of, this is where the example where I told you what kind of fans are coming and watching my game today, how many women are actually attending an IPL game, how many kids are attending it, who are the, what kind of segment is not attending the IPL game. I can look to provide ads and make it entertaining for them. So it's a huge uncontested market today, fan analytics, and especially when you look at social media, today we are judging everybody just by Facebook followers, Twitter followers, Instagram followers, and we say that we have the best fan engagement services, but that's not the case. How do I customize my service for that particular fan? Today, getting a ticket for a particular match is so hard, but if I have actually interacted with an IPL franchise, say 1,500 times, I have responded to their contests, I have responded to their questions, then I deserve the ticket more than a guy who's just has money, or who's just purchased a ticket slightly earlier than me. So there's so much market opportunity in fan analytics, which either if you have good entrepreneurial skills, either you guys can start that, or if not, we need to urge companies and corporate leaders to actually look at this segment. Then we have the body area networks, which is again very niche in India, but slightly more active in the western part. I firmly believe that body area networks is very important for our Olympic sports. This is where the money which is which the government grants should be invested upon, because we are way behind in the Olympic sports because of lack of use of such technology. How faster can I run? Why am I getting tired? The coaches have to use such modern techniques today. Today they're not using that. They're using old traditional means of diet and whatever they have learned. But it's high time that they tie up with guys who provide sensors, guys who provide like, for example, let me give you a quick one in terms of if I take an Olympic sport, say running. Our guys don't even make it to the Olympics. They don't even qualify. So starting today, if they can have a 4-year program of measuring every single parameter that is required for running, from the fact that your start time, from your heart rate, your fat, your whatever, your BMI, whatever works for that particular sport, the chances of us succeeding is going to be great in 3 to 4 years. But we are way behind. The primary reason, I believe, is because the sports today is not run by corporate or modern professional people. It's run by government who are not aware of such. They're not aware of such. They don't have exposure to such technology. So, which is why corporates have to enter and look to use these technologies for players. It's a very sad state, unfortunately. Whereas I'm sure if this kind of technology even comes, it's first going to be lapped up by a KKR or a MI or a RCB rather than your runners or wrestlers or any other sport. So, like a talent like PV Sindhu, without analytics, she's come so far, and the basic analytics she must be doing is more from a performance side in terms of where the opponent scores or what's her game likely to be, which also I'm slightly doubtful, but that might be the maximum extent they go to. But imagine they have these kind of sensors and where they can actually track other data of the opposition. when does she get tired, so maybe I can up my game at that particular point in time. There's small things, how a particular player plays under pressure. What's her number of points she's won when her heartbeat is high, and number of points she's won when her heartbeat is low. These are things which you can actually track. And data-driven coaching and franchise analytics. So I would focus more on franchise analytics today, because we have various sports, we have various leagues with run by franchises across the year. We have a hockey league, we have a kabaddi league, we have a ISL, we have IPL. So that's solid 8-9 months of activity where your marketing guy, your finance guy. So sports need not mean jobs just to work with the teams or players. You do have opportunities to work with franchises in such areas. So assume you're a good sales guy, or you're a good marketing guy. You can tie up with analytics company to actually collect the data you have, analyze. So why is Vivo getting a sponsorship, or which company is putting their ads? Like if you see Amazon now, I see them a lot focusing on cricket. I see Paytm focusing a lot on cricket, not on other sports. So why are these companies actually doing what they're doing? That is something which is again untapped. How do I tell the sponsor that if you say, for example, today if I tell Amazon that there's a good chance that today Dhoni is going to score 100, or Virat Kohli is going to score 100. So the moment he scores 100, I would like you to put your ad, because this is where there's going to be maximum traction. The numbers say a particular thing, or if I know that these two teams are going to play a close game, there's a chance that this game would go down to the wire. I would ask my sponsor guy to play his ad slightly towards the end, so that more people are likely to watch that, and I can obviously bulk up the rates. And I use the same information in a different way by going to IPL and telling them, please keep the rates for the last 2 overs or the last 1 over extremely high for this particular match, because there's going to be more people wanting that. Or if I know a particular milestone, or I know this bowler is going to get this batsman out, there's so many small things where today people are not actually tapping. And finally, the data-driven coaching, which I think is may not be a reality, to be honest. It depends on how to a certain extent, coaches can use analytics at a very young level, but to collect data is going to be very hard. If I ask every coaching academy, school coaching academy, to actually collect a large amount of data from their practice matches and then try to analyze, it's not an easy proposition. That has to be done it should be done in a phased manner, in a very meticulously, because the data quality might be sacrificed. So these are some of the key applications, and I'll quickly wrap up the session with a few case studies. So let's look at a particular example. So if you had 2 players and you are part of a particular IPL franchise and you have been hired since you were supposed to be good, so who do you pick in an auction if you have to play the role of a finisher? So you have player A, you have player B, and these are his numbers. So typically today, I will tell you how it is done, and I will tell you how analytics or data can actually play a role. So if you look at player A and you look at player B, one guy is definitely experienced. One guy has scored more 50s. He has a lower strike rate, and sixes are more or less equal. So this is what is there in front of, say, a team owner. Today, to be very honest, teams just go with a guy like player A for 3 reasons. One, he has a lot of experience, so he's played in this field for a long time. 2, he's scored a lot of 50s, and I'm sure he'll be able to bat for long periods of time. Whereas if you look at player B, his strike rate is way above, and he scored 84 sixes in just 77 matches. Whereas player A has scored 77 sixes in 125 matches. So this guy scores more than a 6 a game, whereas the player A scores half a 6 or a 6 in 2 games. So, and our focus is to play the role of a finisher. The finisher's job is to just come and start hitting from ball 1. There's no point in looking to take singles or score, and the odds of you actually scoring a 50 is going to be very low unless your team is like 30 for 3 or 30 for 4. The chances of you scoring a 50 is very low. So ideally, data says that you'll have to pick player B, but today the industry is in a position where you generally go for player A because the player A might be a big guy who might have played in international matches, whereas player B is not. So no amount of experience cannot be maybe replaces the argument you would ideally receive. But I think maybe it's changed a lot. To be honest, it should be it's far well understood this in the IPL especially, and things are changing. So teams are becoming smarter. So obviously the answer is player B, like I had mentioned earlier. So it's very role based, and as a finisher you do expect to have a high strike rate and have the ability to hit sixes. Player A would ideally be more suited at the top of the order, where you get to bat for a long time and average is more important than strike rates. So for each particular role, it's important that you have particular data points. Next up is where data analytics can actually help. Some sample examples are these. If Kevin Pollard actually plays 22 balls, MI lose only 15% of the time. So this is something which no amount of watching cricket or experience or coaches can tell you. This is purely got based on numbers and somebody understanding the fact that Pollard needs to spend more time to actually help the team win. If you look at overall T20 teams that have Kevin Peterson and they're playing 11, maybe he may not score or he may not score consistently, but somehow there's a correlation between Kevin Peterson and the team in which he's playing. They have the highest win ratio. So if Kevin Peterson is part of my team, there's something he adds. Maybe the 3 matches he plays properly, they end up winning. Maybe there's something which is what you need to dive deep. Impact of a leg spinner in a team. How much do I need a leg spinner? So you would have seen IPL how it was in 2008 and how it is today in 2017. The teams are obviously factoring all these things into consideration. They are doing the analysis. In fact, Mumbai leaving out Harbhajan, I'm sure is for the playoffs is a sure decision taken based on analytics. Similarly, what is the need to have a third man in T20s? Do runs actually go there? If you see Test cricket and ODI cricket, a lot of runs actually go to that region. But if you see T20s, the number of runs actually are very far lesser in a particular match. So do I need a fielder there? Can I use that fielder in a much better position to save runs? These things only data can tell you. Are wickets overvalued in T20s? So this is a case study which I would like all of you to think about and maybe do some analysis in your free time, because wickets are very, very overvalued in T20. Sometimes you don't need to have, you need to use your resources optimally. For example, if you take the IPL final, at the end of the 19th over, Pune had 7 wickets in hand. You don't need to have so many wickets in hand to actually chase. They could have attacked much earlier, and they should have backed their batsmen to score remaining runs, even though if they're not proper batsmen, because wickets are sometimes very overvalued in T20s. You need to make optimum usage of resources. You have 20 overs, you have 10 wickets. You can afford to lose a wicket technically every 2 overs. Or even if I look at top 6 or top 7, I can afford to lose a wicket every 3 overs. So sometimes wickets are overvalued, and this is a slow change, but I'm sure teams would buy into this in the near future. So another simple case study, if you look at, so these are basically numbers for various batsmen in one of the seasons of the IPL. So look at the balls, look at the runs, look at the average. I've highlighted those who are highest in each parameter. For example, runs is basically Uthappa is 660. Average, if I go, it's Lendl Simmons. If I look at strike rate, it's Saha. If I look at dot ball percentage, it's David Warner. And the other 2 parameters, Sehwag. So who is the best top order batsman? What is that you actually see to analyze who's the best top order batsman? So there's no one answer to these kind of questions. To be very honest, there's no one answer, but there are 2-3 ways of proving this to the person. All this depends on the stakeholder you're actually dealing with. If there's a guy who's totally into analytics, who understands models, etc., you can actually build a model and try to run it to various KPIs and try to find out the most impact player based on this, giving weights, and that's one approach. Or if there's a guy who says that, if there's a coach who says that, look, all I want my batsman to do is to score 30 runs every game. So then I look at averages. If there's another coach who says, I want the fastest player, I don't care, I want him to take advantage of the power play, I want him to score at least twice the number of runs in the number of balls he faced, then I would go for the strike rate. So there's no one answer to this. So don't expect your model to be accepted by everybody. Sometimes it has to be as close to the perceived value. So that's very, very important if you want to convince people. One advice I have for everybody is your model, however good it might be, if it doesn't throw up the names which you might have those names as perceived value, it's going to be very hard to convince. So there's something called perceived value and there's something called the actual value. So you will have to make sure your model throws up results logically which is in sync with the perceived value. Otherwise, there's a good chance that a lot of coaches or stakeholders will not accept what your model says. So what are the limitations of analytics? So once Billy Bean actually remarked that my job is to get us to the playoffs, whatever happens after that is luck. And that I think holds good, fair, it's very fair judgment, because even if you take any World Cup or any kind of league where you have playoffs, the least you could do is use all your data, use your information, and help your team make the playoffs or make the semifinals or finals. After that, sometimes it comes down to instinct, or it also comes down to the fact that one player might have a very, very good day that day and you can't do much about it. So analytics might be more useful when you have a large sample and something to measure over a period of time rather than just for one game or two games. So which is why even if a team actually uses analytics and makes the playoffs every single season, as a fan also I would be very happy rather than not using anything. And one thing with my experience, analytics is used at least to 50 to 60%, and the remaining 40% is left to gut feel, remaining 40% left to the experience of the player, remaining the 40% is also left to the kind of skills the player brings to the table. So you can't always say that if I measure analytics, I will end up getting the best results. In terms of other limitations, sometimes privacy, security of data, sometimes the data is inaccurate and incomplete. If you have a slightly smarter stakeholder on the other side, they may question you on some amount of data not being taken, or if they remember some particular situation and your data does not throw up that situation, you might be posed such questions. One thing I would again advise is allow cricketers, allow players to basically take their decisions, and you validate those decisions using numbers. That way it's a win-win situation for both. If the number says completely opposite of what the coach or the captain says, then it's our duty to go tell them that this is what the numbers say and maybe you need to relook at your thoughts. Rather than you throwing up information first and then trying to argue with the stakeholder. The best way is to listen to them and try to validate that using numbers. Then inaccurate modeling lead to wrong calculations. Sometimes when you're trying to predict the score, if you're given greater weightage to say, if you don't give weightage to the bowler bowled or the batsman who's batting, your model can throw completely wrong conclusion. So you need to run the model to various situations before you think it's a good model. And finally, if you do not have a good domain knowledge, there's a good chance that you will draw the wrong conclusion. So what are the skills required to actually shine in this domain? You need to, I put it in order of priority. Right now, skills required to shine in analytics in India basically is a domain understanding. You need to be extremely strong in your domain, because the kind of people you're dealing with are experts in the field. They've all played the game. We all might have not played the game. I have not played the game at all at any professional level. So it takes a lot of time and patience to actually gain the trust of your stakeholders. So domain understanding is very important. You need to be very strong in your domain. You need to interpret data in the right way. Sometimes you need to take into account the context, the situation of what the number is saying. And without that, you cannot just interpret data. If your data says a particular player plays very slowly, for example, maybe his role in the team is to play slowly. So if you look at KKR this year, if you see Sunil Narayan, his numbers, apart from his strike rate, everything else would be very poor, because he's been very inconsistent. He's been getting out early. It doesn't make him a bad batsman. If the role might have been in this particular team is to just go all out the first 3-4 overs, even if they lose your wicket, it's fine. because our job is to maximize that period. So that's why your domain understanding actually comes into the picture. If you don't know about domain and you're blindly going by numbers, you will not even have Narayan in your reckoning, because you wouldn't even rank anywhere in terms of runs or averages. You need to have a liking for numbers and mathematics. Though I don't think that is a huge importance, but having that would just kind of help you a little bit. And last, unless you're going by the data science or the data scientist approach, you can still get away in this domain without having knowledge of SPSS, SAS, and R. Common to a lot of myth with most domains, where you don't get a job, in fact, if you don't know these packages. But I think if you're very strong and you know your domain and you can't really understand these tools, I think still there's a very, very good career ahead of you in terms of applying your domain and applying your knowledge of the domain. Because what happens today is majority of the people who are working are in finance or pharma or manufacturing and or IT. These are the sectors where most of you would be working on, and here analytics means you need to run the data set on your tool, and whatever the number says, you write the interpretation, make a presentation, and present it to your client. But sports is not like that. You need to be extremely good in your domain, understand the data, and try to interpret it the right way, and maybe convey it to the coach or captain. But the challenge here is to gain an entry. Gaining an entry is pretty difficult, because the demand is very high, but supply is very, very low. You just have very few teams, you have very few sports to actually get yourself a decent profession in this industry. So yeah, with this I conclude this webinar. I might have been a bit quick because I had to complete this session. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and feel free to contact me if you require any personal guidance. Thank you.